Hi, everyone. Welcome back to part two of the Newbie Bites. We're really excited to be here. You'll notice that these screencasts have a slightly different feel. That's because I've changed my setup slightly. I've decided to go with org mode with an Emacs, so that way I can embed the code examples directly into the presentation. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on reading error messages. There's many more types of errors than this in Python, but for today, we're going to just look at these 5 types of errors right here. Number one is the syntax error. So the syntax error occurs when the code is not syntactically correct. While this is true, it doesn't necessarily provide that much information. So we need to talk about what syntax is. Syntax is the set of rules that Python uses to understand what your code is trying to do. So in English, or when we're studying language, syntax is word order or where you place commas. So let's take a look at a little example here in English. This comes from a fall magazine headline, and it says, Rachel Ray finds inspiration in cooking her family and her dog. Without the proper syntax, this sentence is frightening. So if we fix it by putting in a couple commas there, we have Rachel Ray finds inspiration in cooking her family and her dog. So that's much better. And I'm going to go ahead and stick to the second version of that sentence. What are some syntax rules in Python? Here's just a couple examples. Number one, if you open quotes, parentheses, brackets, or braces, and depending on where you are in the world, maybe you have different names for these, so I went ahead and put the symbols on the screen as well. But if you open any of those, you have to close them. Let's take a look at that. Here I have a small example of a syntax error, and if I actually run this code, you'll see that I get a syntax error unterminated string literal detected at line 1. And that's because it recognizes that I opened the quotation mark right here, but at the end of my string, I forgot to close it. So if I jump over here and I insert a parentheses, and now I run my code, you can see it now actually does print out hello world, and we fixed the syntax error. Here's a second example of a syntax error. This one says syntax error expected colon. And that's because at the end of certain statements, such as function definitions, if-else statements, and loops, in Python, you have to put a colon. When we come down here, we have this if statement, and it says if 5 is less than 6, print mathematically correct. Right now, we get an error. In order to fix that error, we have to add the colon at the end. And now when I rerun the code, it prints out mathematically correct. Awesome. Here we are in example number 3, indentation matters. Just to let you know, the indentation error is actually a subclass of syntax error, so it's just a specialized type of syntax error. While there are a couple of exceptions for this, anytime that you have a line ending in a colon, the next line needs to be indented. So you can see down here at the bottom, it says indentation error expected in indented block after the for statement on line 1. So if we move this in and then we run the code, we can actually see, oh, cool, it did in fact print out hello 5 times. Before we get to the next type of error, I do want to do a quick reminder of what data types are in Python. Essentially, these are just different ways that Python stores data. So if you need to store text, Python uses a string with quotations. There's lots of different types of numeric. We're going to focus in on integer and floats today, and probably for the rest of the Newbie Bites as well. Then there are things called sequences. Python, just as an example, uses lists and tuples. There are other sequences in Python, but again, for the scope of the newbies, these are the 2 that we're going to talk about. There are dictionaries, there are sets, and of course there are Boolean, which is essentially true or false. Now, when you have any of these data types in a place where they don't belong, Python raises a type error. So here's an example. If we have 5 plus the string 5, we get a type error, and that's because Python doesn't know how to deal with adding together an integer and a string. One way that you could fix this is you could surround this word, or excuse me, you could surround this character in quotation marks. And now if I run that, I no longer get an error. It actually concatenates together the string number 5 and the string word 5. Name error. This occurs when there is an object that is not found within either the local or global namespace. And so here, if I try to run this, it says, hey, you haven't told me what this welcome object is. So one way that we can get around this is by actually defining welcome. So we can say welcome using the assignment operator of the equal sign and say welcome to the newbies part 2. And now if I run this code, it actually prints out the value of the welcome object. Here we have the index error. This occurs when you try to access an index that is out of range for a list. So here you see I have the list of nums. We have 1, 2, and 3. Remember though, Python starts counting at 0. So the index of the number 1 is 0. The index of the number 2 is 1. And the index of the number 3 is 2. When we try to print out the index for nums at 5, we get this error message. And it says the list index is out of range. So if we change this back to something like, say, 2, what number are we going to get printed out? The number at index 2. So we get 3. And finally, we have the key error. This error occurs when you try to access a key that is not present in a dictionary. So here I have a dictionary of a person. It has a key of the label name and a value of Alice. And here, if we try to look up persons and we look up the key of age, we get a key error. And that's because age does not exist in the dictionary. If I change this to name, and I print this out, it does tell me Alice. If I want to access the age, I have to add that in there. So I can come over here and say Alice is 23. And if I change this back to age, there it is. We actually do get the value of 23. Hopefully this screencast was helpful in getting you familiar with at least 5 common types of error messages. Good luck on today's bite.